Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the Aquarius full moon or Sturgeon Moon, which occurs on the 11th or 12th of August, depending on where you're located. Now, as ever, I'm going to give you a structure of how I'm going to approach this event. So first up, I'll share exactly where it occurs in the world for you. Second, I'm going to explain what an Aquarius full moon essentially means. Third, I'm going to share a simplified birth chart wheel of the overall zodiac so we can see exactly where each of the main planets are and how this is going to broadly impact us all. But fourth, I'm going to share the event chart. So this is a proper astrological wheel based on universal central time, which actually gives us an ascendant in the sign of Cancer. Now, why this is so important is that we can see exactly where the sun lies in terms of its house position and therefore its specific mode of expression, but also, of course, where the moon is. And we do have Saturn very close to the moon, so this is going to be a potentially quite challenging full moon fortnight. And lastly, I'm going to share each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can watch in terms of your ascendant or sun or both if they're different. So please stay with me for that. Now, if you'd like to engage with more serious astrology, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place of birth, I can give you a roadmap that can guide you for the rest of your life. But in my special package, if you order that, you will also get my forecast for 2023, but get the rest of 2022 free, and there's 30% off. Please see the link below for that. And finally, if you are new to my channel, I'd be honoured if you would subscribe. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. If you've already done so, thank you so much for your ongoing support. So on the screen now, you can see exactly what date and time this event occurs in your locality. So what does an Aquarius full moon represent? Well, in technical terms, if we go back to the 28th and 29th of July, the moon was exactly side by side the sun in the sign of Leo. Now the sun is still in Leo, but the moon is now directly opposite. Now, if we think about a new moon, it's when the power and energy and drive of the sun is unified with the more receptive emotional energies of the moon. And the sign of Leo is the most important new moon in terms of the sun in the whole astral calendar, because the sun rules or governs the sign of Leo. So it's very much about self-expression, individuality, passion, joyfulness, creativity, flair. It can be about social hopes and it can be about our love life. So when we set our intentions on that new moon on the 28th and 29th of July, we're now getting a measure of exactly how all our passions and hopes are developing, because the moon is now in opposition to the sun. And the sign of Aquarius, completely in contrast to the sign of Leo, is much more about the collective. It's about us as an overall group of people. So it's about community, it's about society. In more astrological terms, the sign of Aquarius is about higher principles. Now, it's the water bearer is very much a simile to the concept of baptism. So we need to check out where those intentions that we set on that new moon are up to. How are they being viewed by other people, the collective, our friends, our partner? And so it can be a potentially tricky moment, but also it can be a reminder that we can't just focus on what we want from situations. We also need to stay conscious of how our approach, our personalities or our interests do impact on those people that we're most closely involved with, whether it's a partner, a family member, or particularly on this full moon, our friendships and our future direction in life, which is very much to do with Aquarius energy. So that's really what an Aquarius full moon is about. So over the next couple of weeks, we need to make sure that the things that we've been pouring energy into are actually working in a way which is going to be positive for us going forwards, future forwards, which is what the sign of Aquarius is very much about. Now on the screen now, you can see the simple zodiac wheel, where you can see that the sun is in house 5, which is the 5th zodiac sign. It's fire, of course, which is Leo, and of course it's fixed. So it's very much to do with a sustained purpose. But of course the moon in the sign of Aquarius is also fixed. So any inflexibility is not going to be useful over the next couple of weeks. Now you can also see in house 2 that we have that mighty conjunction, which is separating a little bit now. It came up to a climax at the end of July and the start of August between Uranus, the North Node, and Mars. Now I have read that this event hasn't occurred for 2,500 years. The real significance is that it last occurred 15 years ago in the sign of Pisces. And of course we had a recession, an onset of a recession in 2007. And in 2009, we also had a recession when Uranus and the North Node were in Capricorn. Mars on that occasion, like now, was in Taurus. So this is a particular event that does seem to have an impact on financial systems. And in the sign of Taurus, which is very much about everyday money, and also a fixed sign, which really resists change, but we got the planet of change, Uranus, really provoking things. So there is a lot of tension that is going to come from this event. So house 2 is all that Taurus stuff. House 5, we have Venus has just moved into Leo, but we have the Sun. But crucially in house 11, which is the collective, we have Saturn very, very close to the moon. So I think what I see from this event is the impact of the cost of raw power, raw resources, of fuel, of interest rates. All these things are going up. We've got a big reset going on in the financial system, and the impact on all of us collectively with Saturn on the moon is not necessarily going to be very easy. There are some sort of high points from this particular event. You can see that Mercury is actually in the sign of Virgo, which it governs, and Mercury is very much about precision in the sign of Virgo, but also about trying to get tangible benefits. So the link between Mercury and the North Node, it's a little bit wide, about 5 degrees, and also Uranus suggests we need to stay open-minded about how we can evolve. So even though the main event is occurring in the sign of Aquarius, fixed, the Sun is fixed in Leo, and that collective in Taurus is fixed, and that can all resist change, we do need to be very open to the potential for evolution in our approach. Now on the screen now, based on Universal Central Time, we have the event chart. And this sees the ascendant in the feeling and caring sign of Cancer at 14 degrees 35. But it means that Venus, the planet of love, but also of money, is actually in house 2, which can be very good. That can bring money in when Venus is in house 2. And of course, the sign of Leo is very much to do with, emboldening our sense of personal appearance and feeling good about ourselves. So, that's a nice position for Venus to be in. But you can see that the Sun is not just opposite the Moon, and the Sun's in house 3, we also have Saturn parked up next to the moon in house 9. So the thing that I can tell you from this event over the next couple of weeks is we almost certainly are going to have much greater impact on travel systems. And because of the restrictive energies of Saturn, the chances are that, whether it is the muddles to do with customs, on the Brexit situation, or it's to do with lack of staff, so the air carriers are saying in terms of baggage handling, or it's to do with COVID, or it's to do with the economic climate, or it's to do with the war in the Ukraine, I think we can expect disruption to travel over the next couple of weeks. But of course the 3rd and the 9th houses aren't just about short and longer term travel, they're also what govern philosophies. The 9th house, higher philosophies, the 3rd house, very much everyday communication, text messages, quick journeys, chatting over the fence with the neighbours, our interactions with siblings as well. And you can see that Mercury, which governs the sign of Gemini, in a 3rd house influence, is also in this Placidus chart in the 3rd house along with the Sun. So that's interesting. It suggests that there's going to be a lot of debates going on. There's nothing new in that, but of course we've seen more and more polarization of different ideas in the world. And I think that in some ways the free liberal world is eating itself alive by the fact that opinions can be expressed that are not checked in fact frequently enough, and this can lead to a lot of information getting out there which distorts the reality of what is meaningful. There is, however, a terrific link between Pluto and Mars in this chart. Now this is one of the most self-determined and self-motivated aspects that you can possibly get. Pluto can be about power in an inappropriate way, but it also can be about transformation deep within ourselves. And you can see that Mars in this chart is actually in house 11, very Aquarius, and Pluto's in house 7, very Libran. So if we can be determined to try to connect to one another in a passionate but meaningful way, that can be for the greater good. But we do have a tension between the role of Mars and the position of Saturn. So they're in an exact square pretty well, just a couple of degrees apart. We also have a bit further apart Saturn repeating that square with Uranus. And Uranus, of course, goes into a retrograde on the 24th of August, but Saturn's been retracing its steps for some while. And by the 2nd to the 12th of October, they don't quite come into an exact square again. It's about a minute. But this is a repetition of the influence that we had exactly 3 times in 2021, the last on Christmas Eve. So I feel that the 11th house represents the collective. Uranus is the ruler of the 11th house, the co-ruler, of course, along with Saturn. And that's our need to freely mingle and do what we wish. So Mars, Uranus and the North Node in the 11th house, very Aquarius. We want to do what we want, and we want to consume the good things in life, good food. We want to have enjoyable evenings, but I think rules and regulations are going to be imposed which do restrict the freedom of movement. I'm sorry to share this, obviously, it is the times we live in, very, very complex times. Now Jupiter, the planet of fortune, is actually in the 10th house and forging a broadish positive link with Venus. So the 2 planets of fortune, greater and lesser benefics, and Jupiter's in the 10th and Venus is in the 2nd. Perhaps the financial changes that are taking place at this time are going to be a bit more subtle. I don't necessarily feel that we're going to see a massive recession, but I feel that there's going to be a huge slowing down. We've got a massive debt crisis in China to do with property, and that is really significant because a lot of debt is shared around the world these days. It's not kept within the 4 walls of a particular state. So a lot of that debt that's going on in that sector there will be held in other parts of the world. So we're very interdependent on one another. You know, globalism is a reality, unfortunately. But I think that does provide a little bit of hope that the restrictions in terms, or the changes financially that are going to be going on, are not going to be quite as dramatic as they have been in the past. And of course, a lot of checks and balances were built into the banking system in 2007 and 2008 to try to prevent a crash being quite as brutal as it has been in the past. But I definitely think a drop in property values is very likely. We are going to see interest rates go up, so that's going to lead to a drop in consumer spending, and you know, this is going to have an impact on much more, or many more people. You know, it's going to spread out its impact. So I think that this is an event that's going to make us think and be much more aware of how we're connected as a collective because of Saturn on the moon, and that we need to work with one another in as a cooperative and collaborative way. Our desire to have a more consumerist lifestyle is being pushed back not just by the cost of living but also environmental issues. The ninth house is very much about international borders, so I do see restriction on travel, or a lot of potentially industrial disputes. I mean, we've got it in the UK with the train system, so that's entirely possible that that's going to spread out and have an impact elsewhere, that kind of stuff. So I hope that gives you a flavour of the event chart. Now, in terms of each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, please stay with me as I share the implications of this event for you. Well, Aries, the great news is that you still have Jupiter, maybe in retrograde, but you still have Jupiter in your sign. And of course, you also have Chiron, the wounded healer. That's in retrograde as well. I think Chiron is asking you to think very much about your personal strengths, but also become more mindful of your weaknesses. Chiron, particularly if you have it natally in Aries, which a lot of us do, because Chiron has a very strange ecliptic, so many more people have Chiron in Aries than any other sign. So Chiron in Aries is very much to do with identity, but you can see that because you do have Jupiter, the planet of self-belief, in your sign, that could mitigate some of the doubtful inner voices that Chiron can transmit. But of course, you have just got Venus having moved into the sign of Leo, which can be very good for your love and social situation. So what's the implication of having that Saturn in that conjunction with the moon? Well, I think it's an old maxim, but it's quality over quantity. I feel that over the last year and a half, 2 years, your friendship circle has shrunk. You know, I don't feel there are as many people involved in your situation, but the people who are involved in your situation are the people who are much more invested in you, care a lot more about you. So you've probably become a lot more picky about who you spend time with. Now, the fact that Uranus, Mars and the North Node are all in your second house, that is about your attitude to money, quite honestly. And, you know, you could discover over the next couple of weeks that even some friends that you thought were really solid citizens may actually have very different values to you. It's not just about money. You know, it's not just about going for a drink and someone being a bit crafty out of getting out of paying their share if it's a group. It goes beyond that, I think. I think it's much more to do with you're wanting to really only share your time and energy with those people who really have a very similar credo to you. And that's really important because your past life has been much to do with you being very buccaneering and taking risks and just going for it. And I think all these energies are making you much more thoughtful about what's really important to you and prioritizing what's important to you. So, you know, it's great to have friends. It's great to be thinking about the future in a love relationship, but I think it's whether your values align with the people you're spending a lot of time with. If they do, they're going to get stronger. If they don't, I feel that in some way or another, they will falter. So whether this is a sudden process or sudden event or a longer term process really depends on your exact situation. But certainly having your ruler, Mars in your second house, forging that fantastic link with Pluto, the planet of desire in terms of your ambitions in the sign of Capricorn, means that if you've got a very clear idea of what you want to achieve professionally, the next 2 weeks can see you incredibly determined to achieve it. Just be aware that not everybody is necessarily going to be receptive to your ideas quite as quickly as you would like. Which brings us to Taurus. Now for you, the full moon occurs in house 10, which is your responsibilities, obligations around business. It's how you're perceived by the wider world. It can be to do with where you want to shine. So Saturn's saying, for you to really prosper over the next couple of weeks, just be aware that your feelings around your work or your relationships with line managers or people who work for you could be a little bit tense. There's part of you at the moment that wants to do your own thing, and you can do that, but you can't dictate the terms in terms of your professional situation. You know, you may be able to work from home. That's something you may be able to modify to suit your particular needs. But in terms of really getting exactly everything you want professionally, you probably would have to go out on your own and be much more entrepreneurial. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't do that. This chart points towards a real opportunity to be bold. But someone that you encounter, whether it's a boss, a bank manager, a business advisor, perhaps a relative, perhaps an older relative, could be inclined to try to dampen down your desires or dissuade you from going for what you want to do. So just be prepared for those doubting thoughts or voices. That doesn't mean to say that you should be put off by them, but just be aware that they could be there. It's also possible that balancing your work and home life may be proven to be a bit challenging when there's a part of you that's feeling more rebellious and in the mood for change than ever you've perhaps known. It depends exactly where the sun or other inner planets are in your sign of Taurus, but there may be a sense of mutiny around you at the moment. And I think Saturn's just reminding you that if you do shake things up to that degree, it may actually have implications for your own sense of security. So if you're someone who's naturally more of a corporate person who likes to work for a bigger organisation and play a particular role, and that suits you, this chart's saying if you want to keep the status quo, you'll need to be a little bit more cautious. If you're a natural rebel and you really feel that you've been, not enjoying living in this fixed environment for quite some time, this chart's pushing you to think about what you can do that can really shake things up in a much more radical way. So it could be really exciting. Now, Gemini, for you, the sun in the sign of Leo is house 3. And of course, now you've got Venus there. So Venus in Leo is going to give you a great deal more smooth ability to frame your ideas over the next few weeks, so that's really nice. But obviously having Saturn in house 9, it does point towards very similar to the event for us all. Travel plans may not go quite to plan. If you're somebody who is trying to express ideas through a website or some kind of publication, or you're trying to publish something yourself, you're really going to have to work hard. And pardon me, with the energy all stacked up in your 12th house, a lot of restless energy still revving around your situation. But if you're determined to transform your financial situation, it could be an old skill, an old experience, or an old contact who can come back in or be repurposed in your situation in a way which actually can be very helpful to you. Friendships generally, with Jupiter in the 11th house, it could be there's certain people who are becoming much more obvious as being quite consistently supportive, and that's a really, really nice thing. And it's probably people that have much more of a psychological understanding of life. But your ideas are always important to you. And if you are someone who likes to move around a lot, that's often important to Gemini people. But I think both areas can be a bit stilted over the next couple of weeks. There could be a slowdown if you are trying to expand your situation in some way, which can create a degree of frustration. So dig deep, because there is that wonderful link between Mars and Pluto, and using your talents in a new way, or repurposing old skills, or contacting someone you used to have a very close relationship with, could have a really helpful financial outcome. Now, Cancer, for you, the Sun is in your second house of everyday finance, and the Moon in the 8th house of longer term finance. But also the finances to the much more where you're connected to others. With Saturn in the mix, as it has been for the last year and a half or so, you probably have had to be a little bit more careful around business situations. Maybe again, it's about your values. Are your values meshing with someone you're closely involved or attached to? Whether it's a business partnership, a friendship, or even a love relationship. So if your values are diverging from someone that you've been involved with a long time, that can be a very powerful process for both of you. But the thing is that with Mars, Uranus and the North Node in your 11th house, you're really in the mood to stir things up and to create a much more alive and vibrant reality for yourself. You're wanting to live in the moment, but you're wanting to live in the moment in a different way from how you've lived in the moments in the past. So obviously the sign of Cancer is very much focused on protection and defensiveness, but also security. And having Saturn opposite your Sun means that if there are any financial concerns, they could come to the fore more over the next couple of weeks. But I think there's a more radical part of your nature that you're showing a much greater desire to embrace. And that could see you moving away from how you've been for a very long period of time. And that can have profound implications for those close relationships. But with Mars and Pluto in such a beautiful alliance, your desire to embrace that slightly wilder approach to life is going to be very hard to resist, even if financially, or in terms of your tendency to stick with what you know and to play safe, is actually heightened at the present time. There's still maybe another part of you that just thinks, what the heck, I really want to go for it. So some big choices there, I feel, over the next 2 weeks for you, Cancer. Now, Leo, for you, obviously, having the full moon in your opposite sign, I think does mean that you could get some quite frank reminders if someone feels that you've been too single-minded, too self-absorbed with what's important for you. It could be a partner, it could be a friend. There could be some challenges around your relationships. But there's part of you that, a little bit like Cancer really, but you want to shake things up, but it's in a different way. I think you want to shake things up in terms of your worldly role. And I don't think you are being as conservative as you've been in the past. You want to be more daring about how people see you. But someone close to you may be totally unimpressed by this and wants you to continue to be that very reliable, steadfast, kindly, supportive, encouraging, very charismatic partner that you've been. But I think there's part of you that's thinking, no, I need to grab what I need for me more. So there's some resistance from always being the supporter to others, and more desire to really go for what you need, particularly in terms of how you can gain greater recognition. Now, that could be through your talents. It could be, in a part-time or personal context. It could be around your work. And that may mean shaking up some situations that have been well established for a very long time. Because you're a fixed sign, that could be uncomfortable. But there's part of you that I think is going to find it very difficult just to maintain the status quo. Now, Virgo, having Mercury in your sign is wonderful. Because Mercury really helps you to think clearly, to disseminate any information, to be very discriminating in terms of what feels right and isn't right, because Mercury is forging such a good influence or good angle with Uranus and the North Node. I think that's pushing you to take charge of situations and think about expanding your reach, but just at a time when this full moon really emphasizes perhaps the vulnerabilities in your situation. Maybe it's at work, maybe, you know, the dutifulness is a huge part of your nature. Maybe that's becoming more tiring. If there's part of you that, you know, gets a lot of satisfaction, this is very true for a lot of Virgos, supporting and helping people, providing a role or a job, which is very much to do with services, health, diet, healing, all great stuff. But if in some ways following that model is stopping you from being much more spontaneous and doing what you want off the cuff, really that gathering in the sign of Taurus, your sister earth sign, is really pushing you to be much more dramatic in your approach. So what this can be creating, this chart, I think, is a lot of psychological and physical loading. So if you're not feeling free, I feel that you could really feel bogged down and weary. And I think that's really the vibe of this chart. But what Mars and Pluto are saying to you can change it, but it may mean that you would gain the approbation of your critics. And just watch out at work, particularly over the next couple of weeks, because, you know, essentially the sun is in your sector of hidden enemies. And the sixth house is where you need to be very precise, because Saturn is there. Even a small little error could be seized upon by someone who's maybe got an agenda. So just watch out for that. But then there's another part of yourself that really wants to break free. And if you feel that you can't, that could be starving you of oxygen. So finding a way to shake things up is really the central theme of this event for you. Now, Libra, for you, the sun is in your 11th house of longer term planning and friendships and connectivity, so very Aquarius, and Saturn and the moon are in your 5th house, very Leo, so there's a bit of a paradox there. Essentially, if you're not feeling very happy in your love or social situations, this next 2 weeks is really going to amplify that dissatisfaction. The 8th house energy is about change. Mars rules the 8th house through its governorship of Scorpio, and you know, change is something that some of us are very open to embracing, others are much more reluctant to embrace. Something around a property matter could start to develop more positively for you over the next couple of weeks, but at the moment I think Saturn blocking the sun means that whatever you're wanting to achieve, whether it is more personally or with others, it just all seems to be a bit blunted at the moment. You do have Jupiter in your opposite sign though, it may be in retrograde, and that's saying that, you know, if you can find the right connections, the right people to work with, then there is definitely potential to move forwards. But Saturn is saying, you know, you need to scrutinize every part of what you're trying to do. So I think generally at the moment things are slow for you, which is frustrating. And I think the changes you need to make are quite deep and profound. And, you know, that may be something that you're reluctant to embrace, but something around where you live could shift up a gear. But you may have to compromise a little bit about exactly what you want. Which brings us to Scorpio. Scorpio, Saturn and the moon are in your 4th house of home and emotion. The sun's in your 10th house of ambition. Something between balancing your desire to gain recognition and, you know, what you need from that success in a more emotional context becomes much more important. So it's all very well, you know, having a big car and a big package and a big house, but if we're actually feeling empty inside ourselves, then obviously that's not a particularly great situation. Even from the outside it looks, you know, for some people that would be a sign of success. So I think you're thinking much more about your emotional needs in this next couple of weeks around all sorts of goals and ambitions. And because there's such a lot of energy, including your ruler, traditional ruler Mars, in your 7th house of relating, that also can be an area of thought and potential change. The great news about this couple of weeks for you is that your two rulers, Mars, your traditional ruler, and Pluto, your modern ruler, are aligned so perfectly. So if you do need to get across your ideas, you can do so passionately, with great determination, and big changes can come about, but I think that might challenge your emotional security in some way. So there is potential to move forwards, but again, for a fixed sign, it's about accepting that life is a series of changes for us all, and that's not something we all necessarily like to accept. But with Uranus in your 7th house for the last few years, I think you're becoming much more conscious that we can't always just take our partnerships or our interactions with others for granted. We can get unexpected replies and responses as well. That brings us to Sagittarius. Now, your situation is the reverse, in a way, of how your sign is ruled by house 9, but Saturn for you is in house 3, and the Sun is in your house 9. So I think for you, travel could be a little bit inhibited over the next couple of weeks, as it will be for everyone. But I think also because there's a lot of activity in house 6, where you're sacrificing, where you work, that continues to be very important. But with Pluto linking with Mars, a job offer or some kind of financial package could be forthcoming over the next couple of weeks. But if you need to have a discussion, look at a contract, scrutinise an agreement, do so with an exacting amount of attention because of Saturn being opposite the Sun on this particular event. Also, I think that Saturn combining with the Moon in your 3rd house could see tensions with your neighbours. I also think it's possible that maybe things are not quite as easygoing with a sibling, or perhaps you're taking on more responsibility in your community. That's playing a much greater role. But tensions around your everyday world are possible just at a time when you want to embrace that part of you that's more of a free spirit. So there's more obligations. Your nervous system continues to need nursing, so plenty of early nights and some good nutritional food. And if you want to supplement, obviously speak to someone or do your research. That might be something you can benefit from, I would imagine. Which brings us to Capricorn. Now for you, Saturn has been in your 2nd house for a couple of years now. It's your ruler, it's in retrograde. If money is a bit tight at the moment, as it is for many people, you may be, grievously aware of that. The Sun's in house 8, which is about entrepreneurship and being much more aware that things need to shift in order to change the immediate short-term financial issue. And because you've got that collective in house 5, which is very much about risk, this chart is actually counterintuitive to risk. It's saying don't take risks at this present time. But that doesn't mean to say you can't do your research and due diligence like you can do above all other signs. And the fact that Pluto's in your sign forges an amazing link with Mars, which you have an affinity with Mars because it's exalted in your sign and it's in your 5th house of going for it. So if you really have scrutinized everything and you're feeling really confident, you may still decide to try something different. And that is wonderful because that, you're so capable. But if your everyday world is feeling the pinch a little bit at the moment and you're not such an entrepreneurial type of person, this is probably a time to be a little bit more cautious with resources. But with Mercury in your 9th house, perhaps a few trips out, getting away from it all, doing something a bit more spontaneous. Higher education could call out to you as well, especially if it adds to your skill set, which brings us to Aquarius. Of course, this event occurs in your sign. And for you, Aquarius, this full moon is all about relationships. So if you're in relationships that aren't feeling very satisfactory, you're really going to be feeling much cooler about those pre-existing issues. So what you've perhaps been conscious of for a while can now become more clear to you. You know, you may be feeling much less warm-hearted, even to people who've, you know, been part of your situation for some while. There's a lot of activity in your fourth house, so that home issue is still very unsettled, very restless. But I think if a relationship isn't working for you with Saturn in the mix opposite your seventh house sun on this particular event, and emotionally you don't get what you need from the relationship, there may need to be some very frank discussions. And you know, it might not be easy, but with Pluto in your 12th house speaking to Mars, I think if you do clear the air, it actually can be very constructive. Which brings us to Pisces, last but never least. Now, of course, your ruler is Neptune, along with Jupiter. Neptune's in a terrific link with Mars and also with Pluto. So your philosophies, your way of doing things can, you know, be enhanced by those links. Jupiter, your other ruler, your traditional ruler, is in retrograde in your second house, but I still feel that it can bring opportunities financially. It's just that having that Saturn-Moon conjunction in your 12th house, that's really quite tough, to be honest. So if there is something that you've been battling with emotionally, psychologically, over the last year and a half, with all that energy in your third house pushing you to change things up, perhaps there's some inner voices that have been preventing you from really going for it because there is a sense of insecurity or uncertainty or maybe some anxiety or self-doubts which are stopping you from really going for it. So I think over the next couple of weeks, it is possible that you could feel a little bit drained if you're not careful. And when I say careful, because Pluto and Mars actually offer you a terrific opportunity to get together with people who are like-minded and in a very physical way, you know, go for a walk, get away for a weekend with some friends. If these are people you really can trust, you'll have a great time. But if you're in a job, for example, which is very draining and there's not much appreciation or credit for what you do, you know, it's very, very hard to stay motivated. I think your physical, mental and emotional energy could be a bit lower over the next couple of weeks. If you can give yourself permission to embrace the things that you find difficult, accept your vulnerabilities. We in the Western world have a big problem with being vulnerable. We see it as being weak. But actually, once we accept who we are, our shadow side, it just dissolves to a much larger degree. And that can liberate you with more physical energy. And with Mars and Pluto in such a vital angle, if you can be with people who are gentle, understand you, don't put too many expectations on you, really appreciate who you are, then that can be very soothing and improving over the next 2 weeks. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Stay safe, take care, and goodbye.